Hi everyone, it is Miss Melissa over at the Whispy Traveler. Happy Halloween, everyone. We had a special visitor today. A Ghostbuster showed up at our house. So get ready for our visit with the Ghostbusters.
The haunted house. One time a preacher went to see if he could put a haunt to rest at a house in the settlement. The house had been haunted for about 10 years. Several people had tried to stay there all night, but they had always get scared and run out. So this preacher took his Bible and went to the house, went on in, built himself a good old fire, and lit a lamp. Sat there reading the Bible. Then, just before midnight, he heard something start up in the cellar, walking back and forth. Then it sounded like somebody was trying to scream and get choked off. Then there was a lot of thrashing around and struggling, and finally everything got quiet. The preacher took up his Bible again, but before he could start reading, he heard footsteps coming up from the cellars. He sat watching the door to the cellar, and the footsteps kept coming closer and closer. He saw the doorknob turn, and when the door began to open, he jumped up and hollered, "What do you want?" The door shut back easy-like. There wasn't a sound. The preacher was trembling a little, but he finally opened the Bible and read a while. Then he got up and laid the book on the chair and went to mending the fire. Then the haunt started walking again, and step, step, step up the cellar stairs. The old preacher sat watching the door, saw the doorknob turn, and the door opened. It looked like a young woman. He backed up and said, "Who are you? What do you want?" The haunt sort of swayed like she didn't know what to do. Then she just faded out. The old preacher waited, and when he didn't hear any noises, he went over and shut the door. He was sweating and trembling all over, but he was a brave man, and he thought he'd be able to see through it. So he turned his chair to where he could watch, and he sat down and waited. It wasn't long before he heard the haunt start up again, slowly, step, 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 closer and closer, step, step, and it was right at the door. The preacher stood up and held the Bible out before him. Then the knob slowly turned and the door opened wide. This time the preacher spoke quiet-like. He said, "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, who are you and what do you want?" The haunt came across the room, straight to him, and took a hold of his coat. It was a young woman about 20 years old. Her hair was torn and tangled. The flesh was dropping off her face, so he could see the bones and parts of her teeth. She had no eyeballs. There was a sort of blue light way back in her eye sockets, and she had no nose on her face. Then she started talking. It sounded like her voice was coming and going, with the wind blowing it. She told how her lover had killed her for her money and buried her in the cellar. She said if the preacher would dig up her bones and bury her properly, she could rest. Then she told him to take the end joint of the little finger from her left hand and lay it in the collection plate at the next church meeting, and he'd find out who had murdered her. And she said, "If you come back here once more after that, you'll hear my voice at midnight. I'll tell you where my money is hid. You can give it to the church." The haunt sobbed like she was tired, and she sunk down toward the floor and was gone. The preacher found her bones and buried them in the graveyard. The next Sunday, the preacher put the finger bone in the collection bin, and when a certain man happened to touch it, it stuck to his hand. The man jumped up and rubbed and scraped and tore at the bone, trying to get it off. Then he went to screaming like he was going crazy. Well, he confessed to the murder, and they took him on to jail. After the man was hung, the preacher went back to the house on midnight, and the haunt's voice told him to dig underneath the heart rock. He did, and he found a big sack of money. And where that haunt had held on to his coat, the print of those bony fingers was burned right off into the cloth. It never did come out.
Zach, thank you so much for coming and checking the house out. We now know there are no ghosts. Also, thank you for those ghost stories. We will see you guys in the next video. Hit like, hit subscribe, Check back later for more songs and stories. Bye!